we recognize an industry leader who's pushed the limits, changed the game, been an example of the innovation this industry lives and dies by. We honor a leader who has invested in and is committed to supporting the ecosystem here in Massachusetts. Today, we present the Henry A. Termeer Innovative Leadership Award to a gentleman who fits those criteria perfectly. Joe von Rickenbach, co-founder, president, and CEO of Parexel, is a pioneer in clinical research outsourcing and has grown his Waltham-based organization into a $1.4 billion global company serving the world's largest biopharma companies, as well as the next generation of innovative new companies. Today, Parexel employs nearly 14,000 people in 73 offices across 51 countries, including 2,000 people right here in Massachusetts locations. Under von Rickenbach's leadership, the Parexel Academy is committed to developing the future biopharmaceutical workforce with courses specifically tailored to meeting the growing talent needs of the clinical development job market. That commitment is evident in programs like Parexel's new partnership with Salem State University to offer a postgraduate certificate program in clinical trial management. Earlier this year, von Rickenbach was elected chairman of the Association of Clinical Resource Organizations, known as ACRO. We've already talked about how our industry and our trade association and this trade association can work together on important issues. He serves on the board of directors of New England Healthcare Institute and always has been a steady champion for MassBio. We're thrilled to recognize his contributions here today. And I'd like to note that instead of a plaque or a trophy, this year's award is a certificate for him to redeem with Art and Giving, which is an organization that combines philanthropy with fine arts. Half of the proceeds from the sale of this art goes to raise funds for rare pediatric cancer research and other health-related initiatives to help families cope with childhood cancer. So please join me and please welcome me in congratulating Joe von Rickenbach, who we recognize today with the Henry Termeer Innovative Leadership Award. Joe? Congratulations, and just so you know, here's your Art and Giving gift card.
Great.
Congratulations.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here, and I would like to thank Bob for this great introduction. You more or less said it already all, but you know, I have to say when I got his call, you know, 2-3 weeks ago, I was completely surprised about this, and you know, of course, very happy, but also a little bit humbled, I have to say. So, thank you very much for selecting me and you know, basically honoring us. And I say us, I'm pleased to receive this recognition, not only as an individual, but really as a representative of Parexel and our employees in our company, which we have now been running here for 30 years. You know, our employees around the world work very hard every day, contributing to our industry and our clients, and ultimately those that benefit most, namely patients. As Bob mentioned, this year I'm also the chairman of ACRO, you know, which is our industry association. And I mentioned this, and I mentioned it to him also because I view this award in some respects also as a recognition of the contribution that our entire industry has started to play and over the years, you know, in the biopharma sector. So given Parexel's 30-year anniversary this year, so it's, you know, more or less coincidental, I assume, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the changes that have been taking place over this time frame in the industry and some of the trends and how they might have impacted us and also what they might hold for the future. And I'm also going to say a few words about our presence here in Massachusetts and our commitment here to the community in which we have grown up. As we all well know, all too well in some ways, the biopharma industry is under enormous pressure, to increase efficiencies across all aspects. In fact, the pressure from the waning impact of blockbusters, the expirations of various patents, the development costs are rising, reimbursement is getting complicated and difficult to come by, and getting a therapy through regulatory agencies is increasingly more difficult and cumbersome and lengthy. So to respond to these pressures, the biopharma industry is really changing the way it's doing business across all aspects, and that includes, of course, R&D. And as you now know, one of the trends that has emerged out of that is the outsourcing to CROs. And just to give you a little bit of a quantitative sense of what this all means, is that we estimate that worldwide, the biopharma industry invests approximately $135 billion a year in R&D. There's a huge number, and is making obviously a huge difference across many sectors in many countries. And out of that, approximately $85 billion is invested annually in clinical research. So to kind of bring this down to the CRO level, the leading 6 CROs alone have turned over approximately $12 billion last year in fee revenue alone. They also employed approximately 75,000 employees, so which is roughly the same number of people that the entire rest of the industry, meaning internally the entire biopharma industry employs. So you could say half of the entire drug developing clinical researching community is now within the CRO industry. Now, before I go on, let me just quickly give you just a brief profile of ParExcel, which is the company that we started here in Cambridge 30 years ago. Of course, back 30 years ago, there weren't really any CROs. In fact, this was really a completely new idea. And we actually started not as a CRO, but as a regulatory affairs consulting company. Many of our first clients, in fact, were biotech companies. Many of them still in existence, well known today: Amgen, Biogen, Genzyme, Genetics Institute. In fact, I just met a representative of Organogenesis who was a client of us back in the 1980s. Just another little anecdote, we shared space with Genetics Institute at 1 Alewife Place back in the 1980s, right here in Cambridge. And we also got started here in Cambridge. So, the biotech industry at that time was also basically in startup mode and very much in its infancy. As we then progressed, actually, in 1986, we were the first CRO to receive venture capital. There was a big deal, and many of you who are trying to get funding for your companies probably appreciate how difficult it is to get funding. Well, I have news for you: 30 years ago, it was just as hard, especially when you showed up as a service company with no IP. Trying to get money was very difficult. In fact, we were the first CRO as ParExcel to get institutional money from a venture capitalist. But it made a big difference for us because it basically validated the concept of a business, and we could sell the vision that clinical research outsourcing could be a big business, basically. So from that small office, back in Cambridge, now we have grown, as Bob said, to a leading global biopharma services company. We provide a broad range of services across clinical research, medical marketing, consulting, information technology, products and services. And we employ actually over 14,000 employees now. And as he said, we are a very global company, operating in 53 countries around the world. And just a tad bigger than what would fit today into 1 Alewife Place. So over the last 5 years, many of, in fact, most of the big biopharma companies have been our clients. Many of the small companies, of course, as well. and many of them actually very much emerging companies. Many people have a misconception that we only work for large companies. That really is a mistake, because we continue to cherish, to work for small and emerging companies, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. So looking back over these 3 decades, let me just share some trends with you, and some milestones perhaps as well, that shaped the industry and of course also shaped our industry. And I first would like to mention in that context, the Waxman-Hatch Act in 1984. In part, actually, the Waxman-Hatch Act was, you could say, an impulse that encouraged us to start the company, because it established the generic industry, it introduced competition in pharmaceuticals, and really defined the framework in the US, that still to this day defines the way new products get approved and get patent protection, in the industry. And in many ways, it was also the front runner for the Affordable Care Act and its provisions, 26 years later, which established and are hopefully, soon, as defining the approval pathways for biosimilars and biologics. The second point I'd like to make in this context is that over time, the biotech and pharmatech breakthroughs that have occurred increasingly in smaller companies. Back 30 years ago, virtually all breakthroughs and all innovations happened in large companies. So over this time, this has completely changed, and most of the innovations now happen in smaller companies. So it's a very big shift that has taken place. In fact, if you look at the drug approvals last year, 40% of the new drugs and new therapeutic biological products that were approved by the FDA were developed and submitted by companies that have submitted their first NDA. So it's a really dramatic statistic. The third point I'd like to make relates to information technology. So over this time, advances in IT not only enabled the entire biopharma value chain, but also have provided the infrastructure that ultimately enabled globalization. So without the massive increases in processing capacity from IT, many advances in biotech, in science in general, and for that matter in management, would not have been possible over this span of 3 decades. So the fourth point I would like to mention is the International Conference on Harmonization, which eventually encouraged the globalized approach to drug development. And while the harmonization efforts continue, both on a regional and even on an international basis, they have already greatly helped to make drug development very much a global enterprise and a global effort. And finally, I'd like to point out the shift in demographics, which is a really huge point. These demographics have, come to drive the budget constraints, I believe, that we are experiencing today in the entire Western world, as a matter of fact, not just in the United States, and are making reimbursement for new products increasingly more difficult. And ironically, just as medicines that this industry is creating is starting to permit people to live longer and better lives, it's also becoming much more the target of various governments and payers who are less willing to pay for new medicines. And, in another, equally ironic twist, governments and payers are increasingly looking to this exact same industry to help them what promises to be, the crushing costs, of chronic diseases such as Alzheimer's and diabetes. So it's a little bit of a challenge there. So over time, as the industry has evolved, the relationships within the industry have also changed. And many of the small biopharma companies, as you all well know, have started to engage in partnerships with large pharma companies. In fact, over the last 5 years, such partnerships were basically the largest source of funding for this industry, and so are very critical. I know for many of you this is probably not the most convenient or most direct and ideal way to fund companies, but nevertheless, billions, tens of billions of dollars, as a matter of fact, have flown from big pharma into small and emerging companies. Actually, for us, for Parexel, working in these kinds of arrangements over the years has been, really an area where we have excelled, and we have done a lot of work in this kind of contexts. But I also want to mention that, equally or similarly as in the biotech industry, in the CRO industry, relationships have also changed, and we have started to engage in similar kinds of longer-term relationships and closer relationships with many of our pharma clients, usually based on longer-term mutual commitments and investments. And I believe that eventually, this is a very good development because it will lead to faster, more efficient drug development programs. We were one of the first companies actually to get into these kinds of relationships. But I also want to emphasize at the same time, as I pointed out before, we are not doing this in any way at the expense of smaller companies. Smaller companies continue to be critically important to us. This is really where the IP is. In fact, just to share another statistic with you, we believe that today more than 60% of the intellectual property in the biopharma industry resides with small companies, which is a dramatic statistic, just to bear in mind. And of course, that is a testimony to the innovation power and entrepreneurship in small companies. And just want to say a few words about innovation also, since this conference is a lot about, that topic. Innovation is, of course, an imperative in the biopharma industry, and as our clients are increasingly facing the various pressures that I pointed out before, they're also expecting new insights and new thinking from us, the CRO providers. They expect more thought leadership and more guidance that eventually will help them achieve their goals faster. And we have to rise to that challenge and are. And I'd say perhaps the single biggest change in biopharma clinical development over the years has been the shift that has been taking place in the way clinical research is conducted in the first place, namely, out of the sort of, what I would call artisanal shops that used to exist. We have now, fairly sophisticated IT-enabled global companies in the CRO business. And along the way, there was a lot of trial and error kind of innovation in our business, in the CRO business. But I believe in total now, this has resulted in the fact that the running of a large-scale, big clinical research organization has migrated into the CRO business. I believe that this is, in the end, a triumph of market forces. There was basically a competitive event, and what used to be mainly closed shops are now open public companies, that generate benefits to all stakeholders in this area, which includes clients, employees, shareholders, but most importantly, patients. Talking about innovation comes in many forms. In recent years, there's been a proliferation of software tools, as I mentioned before, in our industry. Virtually every aspect of clinical research is now enabled by some kind of software support. And at Parexel, we have responded to that through the creation of Perceptive Informatics, which is a business that is a subsidiary of Parexel. It's basically a software and an IT business. And we have developed a suite of e-clinical solutions to support the industry. With Perceptive, we are at the forefront of bringing information technology not only to our own clinical research organization, but to the clinical research at large. But innovation in the CRO business isn't just about information technologies and processes. It's, these market forces, which I mentioned before, have compelled us also to be innovators in the actual conduct of clinical trials. So our clients now rely on us, also in thinking innovatively about the way we conduct trials, the way we recruit patients, the way we recruit sites, the way we share complex data, or even the way complex submissions are made to regulatory agencies. And so while a lot of the changes that happened along the way in our industry, one by one, were basically competitive moves that were relatively self-interested by various players, they have in aggregate resulted in more efficiency and more transparency and in the emergence of a fairly impressive industry overall. So ultimately, I think these changes resulted in better, faster trials, better trial conduct, and ultimately in getting, life-saving medicines often, through regulatory agencies faster and to patients faster. So what does it all mean for the future? I would say, in spite of all the challenges that the industry is facing, personally, I remain optimistic. We can draw on tremendous scientific breakthroughs represented by many of the companies that are present here today. The budgetary challenges will focus minds ultimately when it comes to allocating capital efficiently, and I believe new relevant products will be brought to market. Certainly if you look at last year's results, I know the commissioner was here this morning, but if you look at the results last year in terms of approvals, we had nearly 40 approvals of new molecular entities, which is a sort of a seasonal high, if you want. We haven't seen these kind of numbers of approvals since the 90s, since 1997 to be specific. And by the way, as I said, 40% of the approvals were from emerging sponsors, basically. So, and 16, by the way, were designated as clinically high priority. So not only are we seeing more, I think we're also seeing actually better quality in the pipeline. So just finally, let me just quickly make a couple of comments about our presence here in Massachusetts. We're a global company, of course. 65% of our workforce is outside of the United States. But we have grown up here in this community. We are very committed to this community. We believe this is really the sort of the hub of the biotech industry in the United States. It was very interesting for me personally to see how over the years, over the decades, one big pharma company after another moved to Massachusetts. Back 30 years ago, there was hardly anybody here, certainly in terms of large pharma. And today we have Novartis, Pfizer, Rono, as we just heard before, Glaxo, Sanofi, Takeda, just to name some household names. And so a tremendous change there. And if you add in all the biomedical research institutes, hospitals, universities, and so on, it's no surprise to anybody that we certainly believe that this is one of the most exciting bioclusters really in the world. And it's, for us also gratifying, and for me personally gratifying, to have been a participant in the emergence of that and really having been a witness of how this happened and occurred, and certainly also like to acknowledge the role that MassBio has played in that context. One other thing has happened as the changes in the CRO industry occurred, the growth in particular, and that is more and more of the training that is necessary in the industry is now falling on our shoulders. The concurrent with more outsourcing, less employees remained in the pharma industry, and so more and more we have to take on the job basically of training the future of the industry in terms of new leaders and emerging clinical researchers and researchers in general. And one way we have accomplished this is through this partnership that we have established with Salem State University, as Bob mentioned. This is the goal of this program is to educate new clinical researchers, and the program, of course, benefits our company, but actually the industry at large. So we are excited about the graduates there, but they can go ultimately wherever they want. So I'm proud of this initiative. I think it's a little bit of a pioneering event, actually. Originally developed in Germany, where we have a similar program under the Parexel Academy, and we have another program also running in Singapore. We kind of feel that this is a way for us to give back a little bit to the community here in Massachusetts. And it's, of course, in that sense also important to me personally. I'd also like to congratulate the Gloucester High School. It's really terrific to see these kids and how inspired their teacher also is. You know, it's really, it's great to see that. And, you know, congratulations to you. You know, we certainly all can support the, you know, these young people and their teachers in you know, emerging, in their emergence as a leader in education to bring in the next generation, you know, of researchers, clinical researchers, hopefully as well. So in the end, Parexel owes its success to the talent and to the expertise of all of our employees around the world, but not least here in Massachusetts. As Bob mentioned, we have 2,000 employees here in Massachusetts, which makes us a fairly sizable employer actually here. I'm obviously grateful for their dedication and, you know, for their support every day. And on behalf of Parexel and on behalf of the entire CRO industry, I'd like to thank MassBio for this award. It's a great honor to receive it. And, you know, I thank all of you for attending and for participating in this event. Thank you.